Thom Hartmann Book Club today. We're reading from United States of Distraction, Media Manipulation in Post-Truth America and What We Can Do About It, by Nolan Higdon and Mickey Huff. And this is from the foreword by Ralph Nader. Ever since the few began to control the many, disinformation, fabrications, and distractions have been used to shape consent, impose submission, and maintain domination. Whether by the invoked authority of God, the divine right of kings, the dictatorial embodiment of a fatherland, the dictatorship of the proletariat, or the tyranny of commercially managed marketplaces, the casualty of such control has always been the ability of ordinary people to give voice to their own realities, needs, demands, and grievances. Given the inherent pragmatism of the human mind, the oppressed have often found it safer to believe rather than to think, to obey rather than dissent. Today, such a path is reinforced by a plutocratic political economy that allows corporations to dominate mass media, education, and the production of knowledge and memory. Human history, however, has not been without its visionaries, seers, and prescient intellectuals, poets, artists, thinkers, and philosopher rebels. Every major religion admonishes its adherents not to allow the merchant class, with its singular focus on aggregating profits at the expense of truth, compassion, and self-restraint, to amass too much power. Such instructions have emanated not from revelation, but from ethics learned via the daily experience of living in community with others committed to the common good. Unfortunately, it has not been the transactional incentives of commerce, but the cooperative bonds of community that dominate the most significant acts of life in the United States today. The dystopian scenarios portrayed in George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World look like understatements compared to today's plutocratic deployment of communications technologies, many of them developed by taxpayer-funded government programs and grants. The ultimate success of top-down censorship is self-censorship by the people. The same holds true for mass surveillance. From radio and television to the internet and smartphones and all the video platforms and apps in between, commercially controlled media have used seduction and addiction to lure users to increasingly stare into screens and share personal data and location, thus becoming complicit with authoritarianism and mass surveillance. In the process, the population has become fact-deprived and over-entertained, with lowered expectation levels and reduced attention spans. These technology-driven changes have distracted people from their rights and powers as citizens. As authors Nolan Higdon and Mickey Huff write, long before Trump's candidacy, ratings drove programming and news. In the process, celebrity, entertainment, scandal, crime, disaster, and spectacle clearly dominated over substantive reporting, and public interest advocacy capable of questioning and countering abuses of corporate power and government authority. Trump, they noted, came right out of the omnipresent corporate commercialism. Deadly degradation of media is everywhere. Fueled by Madison Avenue's promotional perfidy, the junk food industry, bypassing parental authority, has lied its way directly into the stomachs of tens of millions of children, creating an obesity epidemic with its attendant diseases. Alternative facts, anyone? 45 years ago, venerated CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite called the 3 minutes or so devoted to a serious news story merely a headline service. If anything, the situation has worsened since Cronkite's time. Gone are the fairness doctrine, the right of reply, and any pretense that the Federal Communications Commission is regulating the broadcasters according to the 1934 Communication Act standard of the public interest, convenience, and necessity. The takeover of hundreds of newspapers, local television stations, and radio stations by corporate profiteers is still worsening. These corporations loot vulnerable media operations by cutting out reporters, investigative journalists, whistleblowers, educational content, and local coverage. Magazines are shrinking, going out of business, or just migrating to online-only versions. Social media cannot generate such content in addition to other shortcomings. Young people today are becoming increasingly illiterate. They spend more time staring at screens, but ultimately read less long-form content unless forced to do so for classwork. Fewer people are showing up for town meetings, marches, demonstrations, and rallies, in spite of the ease and immediacy of communication enabled by the internet. The so-called information age has become the disinformation age, with the corporate media's exclusion of the civic community being one of its most devastating triumphs. In the 1960s and 1970s, we could not have succeeded in advancing standards for public health and safety, labor, and environmental integrity without the help of mass media reporting on public campaigns and congressional hearings, or without large audiences tuning into programs such as the Phil Donahue Show, which dedicated airtime to discussing our investigations, reports, and exposés. Now it is not just corporate media, but the Congress itself that is increasingly shutting out citizens groups. The United States of Distraction by Higdon and Huff. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. We have 12 Democrats on a crowded stage tonight. It's going to be interesting. We can pick up a conversation about that, what you're expecting. Fiona Hill, in her testimony yesterday, showed that even John Bolton thought what was going on in the White House was criminal. We will get to that in some detail. Bill Barr is at Notre Dame saying, hey, it's time for a theocracy. There's so much going on. But I want to start with Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, who represents the 18th District of California, is the chairwoman of the Health Subcommittee. ESHOO.house.gov is her website, and her Twitter handle is Rep. Anna Eshoo. Representative Eshoo, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm curious, first of all, what you're hoping for or dreading possibly in tonight's debates as a Democrat.
Well, I'm looking forward, as many Americans are, because the number of contestants has gone down, so it's a very competitive Democratic primary. I've always thought that I look for a candidate that can walk into my heart first and then appeal to my thinking. So that's what's going to guide me, and I think right along with that, what the candidates have to say about their vision for the future of America. I think that's what the American people want to hear. We have many challenges. How are we going to meet them? So those are the two things I'll be looking for. I haven't endorsed anyone, so I'm still listening and watching like many Americans.
Same here. I love that comment, who's going to walk into my heart. I mean, it's sort of the old cliche, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. But I think it's true. I think because Democrats tend to be people who endorse policies that embrace society. Democrats brought us Social Security and Medicare and all these other programs, and Republicans opposed all of them. That there's that sense of humanity that's fundamental to the Democratic Party and the candidates. It's just a marvelous thing.
Well, I think it's fundamental to our nation and our values.
Yes, and absolutely, and the values that we've espoused.
And I would add, Tom, who best can help heal the country and bring us together?
Yes, yeah, that's going to be a very, very essential thing. So you're the chairwoman of the Health Subcommittee in the House. I'm curious your thoughts on what is being done right now to Medicare. I'm watching, since 2005 when Bush came up with Medicare Part C, which is the ability to privatize essentially Medicare with these Medicare Advantage accounts, and they're being promoted, and Trump is loosening the rules around them. And, as a way to encourage even more people to go with basically private health insurance, although they don't realize it because it has the name Medicare attached to it. But what's going on with all this? Where are we at?
Well, we did, Tom. We did legislation on that earlier this year. What I would call them are junk plans.
Yeah.
Because they really cover so little, and I think that they are misleading. Now, the price tag, and people always shop to get the best price, is one thing. But the other is what you actually get for what you're paying. So I did an amendment to that bill requiring all of these what I call junk plans to say in bold print on the cover what the policy does not cover, which I think is really very important. But we're moving on and taking up a very large, important bill to lower the price of prescription drugs. Today, this Secretary of Health and Human Services is banned from directly negotiating with drug companies, and we're going to change that. We have direct negotiations, and they've been in place for a long time with the VA, and this legislation will allow the Secretary to directly negotiate with drug companies for Medicare, certainly Medicare Part D, because that's where so much money is. But all of the reforms that are in the legislation will not only apply to Medicare, but to all private insurance plans. Now, the bill has just been scored by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, and it saves Medicare alone $345 billion over 10 years.
Wow.
So it's going to stop drug companies from charging Americans more for the same drugs but sell less for other countries. It's going to limit the out-of-pocket costs on prescription drugs for Medicare beneficiaries. Today, seniors pay up to $5,100 in out-of-pocket costs, even though they're enrolled in Medicare. They pay that much out of their own pockets, and some pay even more. So under this new plan, every senior will have their out-of-pocket costs capped at $2,000. That's a godsend.
Yeah.
It's a godsend for so many seniors. And very importantly, the legislation takes the savings and invests them in innovation and research for new cures and treatments, and at NIH and FDA. And we're also going to invest these savings in new Medicare coverage for vision, for hearing, and dental services, which are not covered in Medicare today. So it's a very ambitious bill. In the VA, through direct negotiations, the cost of drugs for our veterans is 40% less. So this is, I'm very excited about it, and I think that it's a bill that is going to make a real tangible difference in the lives of people, and that's what we're elected to do.
Yeah, and you're
I'm excited
doing quite well.
about it.
Yeah. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the gun violence crisis. Most people don't. You're on the health subcommittee, and a lot of people don't think of gun violence as a health problem. But I think it's a public health emergency if we've got 40,000 deaths a year from a single cause that's largely preventable, not to mention hundreds of thousands of injuries.
Well, I just held a hearing about a week and a half ago. A field hearing in Chicago, right in the south side of Chicago, the epicenter of where there is so much gun violence. And it was really a rather historic hearing because it's the first time that we've had a hearing on gun violence as an epidemic, a public health issue and challenge. And so we received testimony from physicians, from victims, from city officials about how to treat gun violence for what it is, as you said, an epidemic. 96 Americans are killed by guns every day.
Wow.
Every day. Now, the House has already provided $50 million for gun violence research at the CDC and the NIH. One of the first bills that the new majority passed was the Bipartisan Background Checks Act. That requires universal background checks for all gun sales, and it closes the loopholes when guns are bought online and at gun shows. It's a very important bill. It passed the House. It's sitting in the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's, I guess, bottom drawer in his desk. But I think that the advocacy and of the American people and that kind of pressure on the Majority Leader hopefully will lead to his taking it up, because this is bipartisan. It is an epidemic in our country, and we can do something about it.
That's great. Congresswoman Anna Eshoo of the 18th District of California, the House Subcommittee on Health. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom.
It's great talking with you. Great getting to know you. You're doing just a marvelous job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we're going to dig a little deeper into Trump and his swamp. Stick around. 16 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Warren in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, Warren, what's on your mind today? It says here you disagree with me about something.
Yes. Well, I label it as Medicare for all as a scam. So
Okay.
I'll try and thank you, and I'll try and be as brief as possible.
Sure, go for it.
Back in the late 1800s, Western scientists and physicians developed the concept of diseases. The idea being that you weren't really sick. You didn't have a real illness unless you had abnormal tissue functioning, which is called pathology. And correct treatment would be to treat the pathology. So I'd like to present what the actual results of that are. First of all, 70 to 80%, and I'll choose 70% just for convenience, of people who go to a physician, they can't find any pathology. So the only thing they can treat those people with is what's called palliation, which is like temporary improvement. 6% have
Well, you don't know what percentage of those visits are simply people going in for an annual checkup. I mean, that's got to be a very high percentage.
No. This is people going for a complaint.
But what's the point you're trying to make, Warren? I don't get it.
Well, I'm about to tell you that I want to now look at the cure rate of conventional medicine. First of all, I want to define cure. Cure is that you feel ill, you get treated. You get better, the treatment stops, the illness does not return, and something even more the most important at all, after you are better, you're a little bit more developed than you were before you got sick. So from that definition of cure, 6% of the people who go to the doctor, they have pathology, but it's an acute. And 24%...
What's your point, Warren?
Well, I have to give you these facts before... 24% have a chronic illness. They have pathology.
What does
and it's
this have
chronic.
to do with Medicare?
Because Medicare only treats. Well, let me finish, please, with the chronic ones.
I'm going to have to cut you off. We're going to run out of time here in a minute. What can you please make your point?
Yeah. Well, I'll try to be brief. With the chronic people that have pathology, in every single case, after they've been treated and supposedly cured, they develop a lot of symptoms that get more and more in number and greater intensity over time.
Well, that makes sense. As people are aging, the certain cells just start dying. Basically, they run out of telomere space.
Okay, well, so basically, as far as cure is concerned, at best you're getting a 6% rate of cure and a 94%
So is
rate
your
of
argument,
failure.
Warren, that because Medicare operates in the context of our contemporary allopathic medical system as opposed to, one of the many alternatives out there, whether they be herbology or homeopathy or therapy or whatever, but because it's operating within the context of allopathy, that it's a fraudulent system? Is that your argument?
Well, I would say that you really don't get better with it. And
Well, it's not.
over
It's
time,
not
you just
Medicare.
get worse and worse.
Medicare's not doing anything except pay bills. It's a banking service. It's not a medical service. So how can
But
how
I'm
can
saying
that
they're
be?
only going to get they're only going to reimburse physicians.
So what are you
who do
going to expand that?
allopathic
Well, no,
medicine.
they'll reimburse PAs and PNs, and I mean, there's a variety of people that they'll reimburse, but
No, I mean they won't reimburse for anything that would be curative, like homeopathy or cranial osteopathy or something like that.
Right. So okay. So your entire
basically,
argument was Medicare, if you really want to call it health care, has to embrace alternative therapies. I'm not opposed to that. I don't disagree with that. And I think it would be a good thing. Let's get vision and dental first, right? And ears. I mean, there's like basic stuff that needs to be added, and mental health care in a more expansive fashion. But let's start. We'll be back. So tonight we've got 12 Democrats hitting the stage. You've got, of course, this is in alphabetical order, with the tip of the hat to Laura Clausen over at Daily Kos. Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, I guess it's not alphabetical, Julian Castro, Tulsi Gabbard, Beto O'Rourke, Tom Steyer, and Andrew Yang. So what are you hoping for? It was interesting to hear Congresswoman Eshoo saying, that she's hoping for somebody who is going to heal the country and bring us together, somebody who's going to speak to her heart. I think that, having a sociopath, a cold-hearted, cold-blooded person in the White House for almost 3 years has, had a chilling effect on America. This is a man who doesn't like pets, has never had a pet. Brags about the fact that he's never changed a diaper, doesn't like kids. His job isn't to raise children, is quite happy with tearing babies from their mothers. In fact, has done so with, about 20,000 children right now are in detention in the United States. We're running concentration camps now. And so, yeah, I'm ready for somebody to speak to my heart. What I'm concerned about, what I'm worried about, for example, recently, Pete Buttigieg and Beto O'Rourke have been, trading barbs. And I remember a comment an old friend of mine made, this is back in SDS days in the 60s in East Lansing. Brad was his name, and he said, the smaller the pond, the more the frogs fight. And it really seems like it's weird how, although this is actually a fairly high-stakes game, but, let's stop picking on each other for a while and let's start saying, here's my program, what do you think? So what I'm hoping doesn't come out of this debate tonight, and I know that CNN, they've got a couple of their stars who are pitching this thing, right? It's going to be, by the way, you can watch it on the New York Times website and on the CNN's website, on CNN's Facebook page and whatnot. But it's going to be Aaron Burnett, Anderson Cooper, and then a guy named Mark Lacey, who is the national editor of the New York Times. And, these are people in the media world. And since the death of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987 at the hands of Ronald Reagan, there is no obligation to present actual news. And so all the news folks are working for the entertainment division. They're moneymakers. I was surprised and not surprised to read yesterday that Shepard Smith, who just left Fox, the news guy, the midday news guy, which is kind of one of the lowest paid jobs in television news, was making $15 million a year, which means that, Hannity and those guys have to be making a ton. And Tucker Carlson and you wonder, is that why they keep hanging on to this guy in the White House and the weird ideologies that surround him? I don't know. I don't know. But in any case, these are all, high-profile people who are probably looking to increase their profile. That's not a criticism, but rather noting that this is the system, this is the structure that we have embraced, both parties, both political parties, and the entire political consensus. I think, frankly, it's a mistake. I think that we should have been working with the League of Women Voters from day one. I think the people asking the questions should not be people who are trying to be stars. They should not be motivated by trying to increase the profits of a television network and therefore trying to get gotchas and trying to wound candidates because it'll increase ratings because people slow down for fistfights and car wrecks. So, because this is a for-profit operation that's running on ratings, that bases the advertising dollar revenue on ratings, the question, or the ultimate outcome that the people putting together the questions, and of course the hosts themselves, to whatever extent they play a role in that, and I'm guessing it's substantial, are going to be trying to do. They're going to be trying to make candidates stumble. They're going to try and force candidates to confront each other. They're going to try and start a war inside the Democratic Party because it makes them money as a television network. And this is true of all the networks, by the way. This is not a critique or a criticism specifically of CNN. It's just how it's set up. And I wish that within the Democratic Party there was a movement. I know, Congressman Pocan and I have discussed this on the air on this program, and he's in favor of this as well, that there be as I recall, that there be a movement basically within the Democratic Party to say that in the future debates have to be moderated by somebody who is not a TV star. They have to be moderated by an agency, and I still vote for the League of Women's Voters. They're as nonpartisan as you can get, and they're still around. But there may be others. I mean, other groups that have that kind of credibility. Kind of like the Red Cross sort of thing. You don't. You want to give money to a disaster. That if you give it to the Red Cross, there might be a little more administration than some of the funky little organizations. But on the other hand, it's not going to be one of the rip-off funky organizations. There's some really great ones, and there's some really not so great ones. So you've got this kind of endorsement. So anyhow, that's tonight's debate. Meanwhile, Fiona Hill says that. Says that John Bolton was really upset that Trump was committing treason on the phone with the president of Ukraine. And number two, the thing that I think is the most interesting, is that when the White House contacted Fiona Hill and her lawyers and said, you may not testify before Congress, we're invoking executive privilege, she said, screw you. They sent back a letter saying that in fact, here it is, it's, we do not believe the White House's legal reasoning, and executive privilege disappears when there is reason to believe there was government misconduct. In other words, Trump, you were breaking the law, so we have no obligation to pay any attention to your demand that we not go speak before Congress. All that privilege stuff goes out the window when you're breaking the law. So it's fascinating times. Your thoughts and more of the news of the day right after the break. Stick around. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where despair is not an option. The Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of Black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. quote, "We've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze," end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I was hoping we would not be seeing Democrat on Democrat violence tonight, but that I knew that the CNN is running this thing that their TV stars are going to try to promote that. And during the break, we've got CNN on here in the studio, just in case the president declares nuclear war or something. It's a lot easier to monitor the news by just glancing over from time to time than trying to keep refreshing the New York Times homepage or something. But in any case, they just did a segment. Now, I didn't hear it. All I could do was see it. But they just did a segment where they were talking about how O'Rourke and Castro are going to be ganging up on Buttigieg tonight and trying to take him down. And it's like, oh my God, they're promoting tonight's debate as a fight. And, the guy who does the announcements is like, in one side, there's going to be, it's that fight announcer. And it's like, oh, God, we really need the League of Women Voters or something like that. We really do. This is over the top. Anyhow, Steve in Van Buren, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm a little. I'd like your clarification on the definition of socialism.
There's no one accepted definition.
Oh, okay. I see people on the news, and they say the government takeover of means of production. It was my understanding that it was the workers who own the means of production, not the government.
Well, that's the theory in socialism as defined by Karl Marx. That's not how socialism works in Denmark, or in Germany. There's, democratic socialism, there's communist socialism, and then there's Republican socialism, which is where you transfer hundreds of billions of dollars to oil companies and very, very rich individuals, in fact, trillions of dollars, and you raise the taxes on working people. I mean, that's Republican socialism.
But you build a new sports stadium.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But okay. This is why Bernie started using the phrase democratic socialism when he was 18 years old or something. I mean, so he's been embracing that term his entire career and his entire life. And on this program for the 11 years that he was on every single Friday taking calls from people, Brunch with Bernie, he talked about that. And he said, I realize socialism has become a really charged word because the Soviet Union was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and China refers to it as socialism. But that wasn't really socialism. And, he pointed that out a lot of times on this program. But he's the only one among the candidates who will use that word. Elizabeth Warren was, unwilling to use that word, which I think probably at the end of the day is wise, at least for a small margin of voters who are not, high information voters who are, marginally connected to the Democratic Party and willing to vote, the kind of swing voters. But we'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. Thanks for the call. Robbie, your thoughts on the debate? Robbie in Portland.
Well, yeah, can I actually say something about socialism and
sure, go for
to help the last viewer out? Because it's what I see is you kind of know me a little bit. I'm really concerned with how America is, or I should say the media is framing everything. But basically, socialism and capitalism are not at odds with one another. Basically, they're just different ways that we run our government. So what happens is you have people throwing socialism or capitalism as if it's one or all. But what happens is socialism taken all the way turns into communism. Capitalism turned all the way, it turns into fascism through oligarchs, because you said it was Republican socialism. That's an oligarch. That's fascism.
You're absolutely. I love your definition because you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
And that's a great spectrum.
You might not like what I'm about to say, Tom. Okay. But
so you're going to trash the Democratic Party now, right?
Oh no! Just that last.
Why just trash CNN? I mean, it's take a shot.
No, I appreciate you taking my call, Tom. But I wanted to say the person from California who said she's waiting for a candidate to walk into her heart before she thinks about, the policies or whatever. That is dangerous, Tom. And I got to tell you why.
She wasn't discarding policy. What she was saying, I think what she was saying is that people get elected because they build a heart-based, this is a simple reality of politics, Robbie. You've got to like the person you're voting for. You're not going to vote for them, especially, and you're not going to work for them.
Tom, here's how we get duped. I got to tell you, because we are not a democracy. We are a republic democracy, right?
We're actually a constitutionally limited democratic, representative democratic republic, if you want to get technical.
Yeah, we are a republic. The point, Tom, is that this is how we get duped. When people who are TV personalities like Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Obama, basically these people win the hearts, they get up there and they lie to us. And the thing is if we play this heartstring thing, and we're not looking at
Clinton didn't lie to us. He told us, you should go back and watch some of the 1992 debates with him and Bush and Ross Perot. Clinton was right up front that he was a neoliberal, that he was in favor of so-called free trade, that we're going to replace those jobs with good jobs.
I was 2 years old. I was 2 years old when that happened.
Okay.
So, but
it still lives on YouTube.
If the framing that's happening here is we're listening to the
Robbie, you got to take your thumb off your microphone. You just turned into Mr. Muffle. Yeah, but my point, and I think maybe you're missing this, is that there was a time in the early '90s and throughout the 2000s, and arguably even up through probably the first 5 years of President Obama's administration, where the Democratic Party was essentially embracing those neoliberal perspectives that you're decrying, and that has changed. There's been a really substantial shift away from that, particularly since the election of President Trump. But it was on its way before that. The Progressive Caucus is, if not the largest, the second largest caucus in all of, at least for the Democratic Party, in all of Congress. It's growing. These are all good things, Robbie. We've certainly the party is.
Hold on, but here's the thing, though, Palm, because if we're concerned about election interference, isn't the media doing the same thing that Russia did?
Oh, it's the media facilitated, what Russia did, and by the way, also Saudi Arabia and others.
Sure. Yeah, but we're not even talking about the actual.
That was my point earlier. Is that
primary?
That was my point earlier. Is that I want to see the League of Women Voters moderate a debate. I don't want to see a television network that's making its money on ratings that really is trying to draw blood between Democrats to be moderating the debate. Obviously it's too late, and I don't have any control over that. But anyhow,
sure,
Robbie, I gotta move along. I'm sorry. We're Roberta in Flint, Michigan. Hey, Roberta, what's on your mind?
Hi. It's not Flint. What I'd like to say is, since you have a lot of people, I'm in Swartz Creek. I'm just a little bit out of Flint. Thank goodness I pay water, I think.
Sure.
For everyone who's listening, I know I don't have Facebook, but if I did, I'd be on there slamming, boycott the debates, because you said they run it by money.
Well, but that's true of all the debates, and if you boycott the debates, you lose the information that might be presented. I'm concerned that these kinds of formats are going to hurt our people, but this is the way it's been for 20 years.
You know what's hurting us? Is the 1%ers and these other people that are just taking up space and time when people who have a chance and something to say are interfering with our ability to get any information.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that at all, Roberta. Thank you very much. Robert in Ohio. Boy, a lot of Roberts here in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom, would it be okay if I ask 2 questions?
Go for it, Robert.
Okay, well, the first question is...
That's actually your second question. Your first question was, can I ask 2 questions? But continue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Well, because the first question would be, I know how, Christians and Republicans keep making all of these religious freedom bills, and I want to know, what is the purpose of them if there's just the only religion?
It's to sustain bigotry. They're passing that legislation to appeal to bigots. It's just that simple. What's your second question?
Okay, and the second question is, Christians like to say that they're being persecuted in China. Is that true, or is that something they're like over-exaggerating?
Christians are not being persecuted in the United States. They certainly are in Syria right now. You've got the Turks going in.
China.
You know. Oh, in China, yeah. I'm. You know, any religion is persecuted in China. That's you know, the nature of that place, unfortunately. Connie, thanks a lot for the call, Robert. Connie in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Connie, what's on your mind today?
I would like to bring, it was a pleasure to talk to you. I would like to support Bernie in connecting our health to our dental insurance.
Mm-hmm.
I was identified as having cancer of the mouth, and my palate was removed. But the dentist could not treat you for cancer. So my dentist called Kaiser and had them identify and do the biopsy for me, and the treatment was through Kaiser. So my dental needs to be connected.
Right. So that way you could get it paid for. But you're right.
It's not so much to pay for, it's to have a continuity of treatment.
Oh, that's important too. Yeah, all of that. Connie, thank you for pointing that out, and your own personal story. I mean, that's compelling. And what it tells us is that, you know, the progressives who are promoting expanding Medicare and making Medicare, you know, work even better, and let's add dental to it, and let's add eyeglasses to it, and let's add hearing to it. You know, these are things that become particularly more important too as you age. So, I think it's just a simple, good idea, particularly if we're going to eventually, you know, over a period of a couple of years. Bernie's plan is 4 years, and it's kind of the gold standard now. Extend that to everybody in the country. So, you know, let's start doing it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're talking about the news of the day and taking your calls today. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back, Rose in Flemington, New Jersey, listening on WBAI. Hey, Rose, what's up?
Hi, I want to make 2 quick points. Number one is that the League of Women Voters walked away in disgust when the Democrat, DNC, and RNC got together and created a corporation for these debates.
What year was that?
Oh, I don't know. Some years ago. You have to look it up. I'm
okay.
the blind one, okay?
Okay.
What I wanted to say about that is that let's watch the debates, but let's call up the sponsors and say, you know, we're upset about this. We want the League of Women Voters back. And another thing I want to say is about the missiles in Turkey. Do you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis?
I remember it well. I was 12 years old.
Yeah, I was in high school, and I used to watch Philadelphia TV at that time, and it wasn't on the evening news, but one of my classmates ran over, and at lunch she said, they're putting missiles in Cuba. Mm-hmm. And I also have another personal story about this. I have a friend who married a man who was in the Air Force, and she was over in Ankara, Turkey at the time when the guys came over from Vandenberg, you know. And she had a couple of drinks at the officers' club, and she was never quiet. And she said, you think these people over here are stupid and they don't see what your jewelry is saying? They know all these little toys you're flaunting. And we could have another one of those kind of scenarios.
I don't quite understand that. It's a sweet story.
The guys who came from Vandenberg at the time that they brought the missiles into Turkey, which we put up against the Soviet Union, right. And the Soviet Union was not amused.
Yeah.
They then proceeded to send their missiles down to Cuba.
Oh, that's right. Their rationale for saying we can put missiles 90 miles off your coast is that you just put missiles on our border in Turkey.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I had young girl.
That.
I mean, she was, as I say, she had a couple drinks, and the guys are coming in. You know, the military uniform, they have all that kind of fancy jewelry. And she said, "You think these people are stupid? They know what all that stuff means."
Yeah.
She was made herself persona non grata. What I'm most concerned about is that we have the agenda, for the five deferment chicken hawks who want that 100-year war, and they're willing to, almost do a gamble.
Yeah, and what's amazing is what's coming out now is that John Bolton was the reasonable guy in the room. I mean, oh my God, when John Bolton is the reasonable guy in the room, you know that room should not be running the United States of America's, foreign and nuclear policies.
May I interject one other stupid thing here? On Sunday, because I don't have TV, I catch all the TV talk shows on Bloomberg, and they're truncated to get rid of the ads. Mm-hmm. And I heard something this Sunday to the idea that Rudy Giuliani was trying to court as a client the largest gold dealer from Turkey. Yeah,
that's right.
In the Ukraine.
Yeah, and this guy was also apparently using gold as a medium to hide money for people, as sort of some kind of money laundering operation or something like that.
He would like that. Yeah,
it gets pretty strange. Rose, I'm out of time, but thank you for the call and the fascinating stories. Great talking with you. It's coming up on about 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. We were just speaking with a caller who was talking about how the League of Women Voters stopped moderating presidential debates, apparently in 1988. Did you say, Sean? Which would have been the year that was Reagan's last year, and the campaign was going for George Herbert Walker Bush to become president, and against the former governor of Massachusetts. And the Democrats and Republicans got together and formed this corporation to run the debates. And the League of Women Voters, I don't know if they got pushed out or if they just threw their hands up and said enough of that already. Sean thinks that she says they threw their hands up and they said, okay, screw this, we're out of here. Because that was started in '87 by the DNC and the RNC, and then in '88 the League of Women Voters said enough already, we're out of here. So we have what we have, for better or for worse. I think it's going to be an interesting evening. Keith in Festerville, Festerville or Philadelphia?
It's Feasterville, PA.
Feasterville, okay. What's up?
How you doing, Tom? Yeah, regarding the transcript that was released by the White House, I've read that a couple times. It was online, and it seems to me that there is reference to the server and talk to your wealthy Ukrainians, and that Rudy knows what's going on.
Yeah.
It seems to me like maybe is Rudy a bagman to collect cash in addition to.
Nothing would surprise me, Keith. Nothing would surprise me. I mean, he's behaving like it, and Trump has been hanging around with these mob guys his whole entire life. Roy Cohn was the #1 lawyer to the two biggest mafia families in New York City when he was working also for Donald Trump, and presumably, that, in fact, according to that documentary, Get Me Roy Cohn, that was what led to Trump building Trump Tower the way he did with as much concrete as he did, because there was this mobbed-up concrete guy.
Right.
So, yeah.
But if you look at the transcript on how his lawyer, Michael Cohen, said he talks in a code, if you just substitute transcripts for cash, or the servers, rather, and ask your wealthy Ukrainians, it just that didn't make sense to me, but if you kind of put that in there, it really does.
I'm down with the idea that Trump is broke, that he's living off basically skimming money off money that's being laundered by foreign autocrats and billionaires through real estate.
Yeah.
This is he was one of only 2 real estate developers in Manhattan who was willing to take cash payments from corporations that were essentially anonymous, that were clearly front organizations. I mean, there's some nasty stuff there, Keith. It goes deep, I suspect, and it looks like some of it's starting to come out. Barbara in Sun City, Arizona. Barbara, what's on your mind?
Hi. I just wanted to say it really depends on how they decide to answer the questions. In 2000,
you're talking about the debates tonight.
Yeah, in 2007-8, they asked Joe Biden a question, baited to go after Hillary Clinton, and he refused. He said, "I'm not running against Hillary Clinton. I'm running against the Republicans." And he went after Giuliani, saying he was the most underqualified candidate since Bush, and that when he makes a sentence, it's a noun and a verb in 9/11. Right. And that comment went viral and took down the campaign for Giuliani.
Right.
So Giuliani is personal with Biden now.
Oh, yeah,
you're right. I mean, this is a long story. And it depends on how they decide to answer. Yeah. They don't have to answer the way they're being baited to answer, and it
You're
drives me
absolutely
nuts.
Right. Yeah.
Answer it a different way.
Well,
say,
that happened to some extent. I mean, for example, they asked some healthcare question, and Bernie said, so-and-so, these companies are going to be running ads on your network during the breaks telling people that up is down or whatever, with regard to healthcare. And they cut him off and just moved right along. But Barbara, I think your point is well taken. Zach in Seattle. Hey, Zach, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom. I was curious on what you think the chances of, the two candidates joining forces. I'm a big Bernie Sanders supporter, but if he, chose Elizabeth Warren as his VP, I feel like they would be unstoppable, or vice versa, or any of the two, any two great Democratic candidates in the field. I feel like they should, team up. I just feel like we need many hands.
Everybody's shooting for first place. I mean, everybody wants to be at the top of the list, and that's, understandable. I mean, this politics, these are very ambitious people. These are very political people, so, it shouldn't be any surprise. But, you're right, Zach, and the previous caller, it's up to them how they respond. Gary in Baden, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Good morning, Thom Hartmann. You brought up the point about cold-bloodedness in the context of the liar-in-chief, in the context of the great representative that was on from California.
Yeah, I think he's our first cold-blooded president since maybe Coolidge.
Yes, and this brought to mind my favorite quote by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There's a reason why Franklin Delano Roosevelt, there was a core reason why he was elected 4 times. And that core reason was his philosophy on governing. And this is what he said verbatim. I know it by heart. I first heard it in 1974, if you don't mind me saying. And he said this: government can err. Presidents can make mistakes. But we are told divine justice weighs the sins of the cold-blooded and the sins of the warm-hearted on a different scale. Better the occasional faults of a government living in the spirit of charity than the consistent omissions of a government frozen in the ice of its own indifference. That's the difference today.
Yeah, and that's, is that from his inaugural address, his first inaugural, or is that from, his 1936 speech in New York, wasn't it?
30, somewhere in that area,
yeah. So that's his famous 1936 speech.
That's his core belief.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Made him the man he was.
There you go. Well said, Gary. Thanks a lot for sharing that. We'll be back. We're hitting the top of the hour here. What are you hoping for tonight and expecting and dreading?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is just another N-word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact was made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in Newark, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass us by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to let everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle. We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunter's Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come up and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. We met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest, baddest N-word on Hunter's Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examined the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of him had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until later that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. Gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn, Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout with Officer John Frey of the Oakland police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring the guns with him, but he hadn't, and I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pistol was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house, and she was his neighbor. On the one hand, I was relieved, but on the other, if the police were looking for the passenger who'd been with Huey, it was certain they wouldn't miss David's house, as both were known Panthers. Finally, he found the gun, and it continues from there. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It is increasingly shutting out citizens of the United States of Distraction by Higdon and Huff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Oh, my God. Ronna Romney McDaniel, I believe is her name, it says that nepotism is a bad thing, right? She's the head of the RNC because she's Mitt Romney's niece. and she's like, nepotism is a bad thing. Really? There is so much to talk about. We were talking in the last hour about I said I want the League of Women Voters to come back and start running these things, which in a way kind of dates me. The last presidential debate that they were supposed to moderate was in 1988, and which would have been, I guess, Dukakis and Bush the elder. And the Democrats and Republicans got together and created this corporation to run the debates. And this is a press release from October 3rd, 1988, from the League of Women Voters. Quote, "The League of Women Voters is withdrawing its sponsorship at the presidential debate scheduled for mid-October because the demands of the two campaign organizations would perpetrate a fraud on the American voter," said League of Women Voters President Nancy Newman today. This was October 3rd, 88. "It has become clear to us that the candidates' organizations aim to add debates to their list of campaign trail charades, devoid of substance, spontaneity, and honest answers to tough questions. The League has no intention of becoming an accessory to the hoodwinking of the American public." My goodness. But I'm saying, we need the League back. We really need the League back. Paul Krugman made a real interesting observation, and getting your thoughts here, and I'll be taking your calls in a little while about, first of all, what you're hoping for from the candidates that you support or the candidates that you don't, what you're hoping doesn't happen, what kind of conversation is going to be had, how is it going to, work for the party, and of course we'll watch tonight and we'll have a conversation about that tomorrow. But Paul Krugman's point is that Trump, sort of like Michael Cohen depicted him basically as a mob boss who talks in code and all this kind of stuff, and Krugman is like, the difference between Trump and a mob boss is that because Trump is so dishonest and has been so dishonest throughout his political or his business career, with thousands of people suing him for non-payment and breaking deals and all kinds of stuff. And thousands of, or at least dozens of people that we know of who never even could afford to sue him yet were damaged by him. Some of them have been on this program. That kind of a strategy, Trump's art of the deal, only works if you've got constant fresh suckers. Because once people figure out that your word isn't good, and even that your contracts are no good, they stop doing business with you. And that's basically what happened with Erdogan of Turkey. He was like, this Trump guy talks big, but I could take him down a notch. I'll just threaten to take away his Trump Tower or his 119 other investments in Turkey. Or I'll just do what I want. Or I'll just rage at him. Trump will just back down. The guy's a coward. He's a liar. His whole shtick, his whole business shtick is based on fraud. He admitted it in the Trump University case and paid a $25 million fine. Well, that may work when you're a small businessman, when you've got a small company with fewer than 24 employees, the Trump Organization. I'm not even sure it has 12 employees. He runs a little tiny company. Yeah, it does big real estate, but it's a little tiny family company. And, you can constantly find new suckers, for your grift doing it that way. But when you become president of the United States, the entire world is watching. And after a couple of countries figure out the scam, and obviously Saudi Arabia was the first in that list, and not just countries, Netanyahu, the same thing, Duterte in the Philippines. I mean, it goes beyond countries. It's these individual leaders who are understanding that Trump does not represent historic American values, that Trump Trump is turning America, has turned America, or at least the Trump administration has turned the Trump administration's part of America into a banana republic, into a corrupt organization. And, Krugman points out, correctly, Kurds are dying right now. And Christians are dying right now. I mean, we've got videos now of Turkish fighters beheading the people who were our allies, beheading them on television. It's ISIS is flying their flag once again in Syria. All because Donald Trump took a phone call from the president of Turkey saying, hey, I want this. You're going to give it to me. Well, when we get that he's that craven, he's that intellectually incompetent, he's that emotionally incompetent, he's that lacking any sense of values, his complete lack of understanding of American history and American values, his belief that everybody else is just as corrupt as he is. So he goes to Comey and he goes, hey, cut Mike Flynn a little slack. He's as corrupt as I am. I know you are too. You wouldn't be head of the FBI otherwise. He didn't realize Comey wasn't that corrupt. He didn't, he keeps running through advisors looking for somebody. He's got Bill Barr. Bill Barr was that corrupt. Sure. Oh, yeah, I did that for Bush back in '92. I'd be glad to do that for you, said Bill Barr. He wrote a 40-page job audition. I'm still trying to figure out why. But apparently, we're learning a little bit of why. And this is, I think, absolutely fascinating. Bill Barr lecturing us about morality. Seriously. Bill Barr. He was speaking at Notre Dame, a Catholic university, and he was speaking to a closed audience. The press was not invited. But parts of his speech have leaked out. And it's really pretty amazing. Bill Barr, I'm quoting from a piece in the Washington Post by Catherine Rampell. And this speech was last Friday. It's just coming out now. He said, I'm quoting from Catherine Rampell, militant secularism, he said, Bill Barr said, is to blame for our country's greatest ills, including drug use, mental illness, and quote, an increase in senseless violence. Given such crises, Barr urged his audience to fight back against, quote, those so-called progressives, end quote, and others who insisted on respecting America's pesky constitutionally mandated separation of church and state. In other words, Barr was calling for a theology, or a theocracy, a Christian theocracy. You know, right-wing fundamentalist Christians running our country in order to, you know, kind of put us back together. He's talking like Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan in 1639. He says, this is not decay, it is organized destruction. This is from Bill Barr's speech. This is not decay, it is organized destruction. Secularists, now keep in mind, a secularist is a person who believes that government should be run of, by, and for the people. A theocrat is somebody who believes the government should be run by me because God talks to me. And I know what's best because I read God's word and I know how to interpret it better than anybody else. That's how a theocracy runs. And that's what Bill Barr is suggesting we should have. Let me read it again to you. This is not decay, it is organized destruction. Secularists and their allies among the, and scare quotes, progressives, have marshaled all the force of mass communications, popular culture, the entertainment industry, and academia in an unremitting assault on religion and traditional values. Now keep in mind, this is the guy who is the head of the Department of Justice, the part of our government whose job it is to enforce the law, including the laws and the supreme law of the land, the Constitution, including this idea that church and state are separate things. That you not only have freedom of religion in the First Amendment, you have freedom from religion. And Bill Barr wants to do away with that? Is this his justification? And by the way, if you're going to keep talking about, traditional values and morality, Bill Barr, then, and Jennifer Rubin, writing about this in the Washington Post also, pretty astonishing. This guy is tearing apart America. You know, he refers to countries that are largely populated by black and brown people as S-hole countries. He tears babies from their mother's arms, 20,000 of them, and brags about it. He dehumanizes immigrants. He's told over 13,000 lies. He brags about being a sexual assaulter. Now we've got something like 40 women on the record. He paid off these 2 women with whom he had extramarital affairs. That's a violation of the law, by the way, in order to influence a campaign. He celebrates violence. He tried to obstruct the Mueller investigation in 10 different ways that the Mueller investigation documented, every single one of them being criminal obstruction of justice. He told subordinates he'd pardon them if they broke the law to make his wall. He says, he takes money for projects that Congress didn't appropriate it for. That's, these are all violations of the Constitution itself. He doesn't abide by the letter of the law, writes Jennifer Rubin. This is with regard to having Mnuchin turn his taxes over to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. That's just right there in the law. It has been since the 1920s. He receives foreign emoluments. These are barred by the Constitution. He defies campaign finance laws. We talked about that. He misleads the courts. Remember Wilbur Ross and the citizenship question? Trump lied about that to the court, to the Supreme Court. He surrounds himself with all these people who have been convicted or indicted for criminal activity. Remember when the Republicans were screaming about Barack Obama? Oh, he let Syria cross that red line. That was that, poison gas attack. What are they doing right now? Where's Trump's red line? He loves dictators, be these Saudi Arabian, Syrian, Turkish, North Korean, Russian, whatever it may be. Oh yeah, human rights? Nah, come on, we kill people too. And hate crimes are exploding along with $1 trillion deficit. This guy is neither Democrat, Republican, or anything. This guy is an abomination.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what are you expecting tonight? What are you hoping for tonight? How do we take on Trump most successfully? And for that matter, who do you think might most successfully defeat Donald Trump as president? And welcome back. Tim in Houston, Texas. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today? Tim, I think he tried to take me off mute and instead he hung up. Marta in Brine Lake, Washington. Hey, Marta, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks a lot for all your correct information that you give to us.
We do our best.
My question is, Bernie and Elizabeth all the way. They're going for it. They've always gone for it. Why not?
Yeah.
It's time we picked it up and went for it. Anyway, so my question is, why aren't the presidential debates on PBS?
They are going to be on NPR. I don't know, what the deal is with PBS. PBS is the television side of, public broadcasting and the public broadcasting service. And, I just don't know. Is there some kind of a license agreement? Would there be a dispute? I mean, you could say the same for C-SPAN, actually, which exists as a consequence of the cable companies having to pay for the use of the commons, and thus they have to fund C-SPAN. But I think it's going to be widely available, Marta. Was that your concern?
No, I was just wondering. I remembered, I think back in 2016 when Eiffel hosted the the presidential debates between Bernie and Elizabeth.
You're right.
I mean, Bernie and Clinton.
And Hillary Clinton, yeah. And Gwen did a marvelous job. Was that exclusively PBS? I don't recall. Or was that with other network people?
I thought it was on PBS, but I might be wrong. I'm wrong about a lot of things.
Yeah, me too. No, I just don't, clearly remember, but I'll have to check it out. Marta, thank you so much for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Thank you. Dan in Portland. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good. What's up?
Hey, I just wanted to comment real quick on, you were just talking about Barr and, not living up to American standards or
Barr lecturing us on morality while he's part of the most immoral administration in the history of the country.
Right, but America's basically, and this is my opinion, founded on deception, lying, genocide, corruption,
and hypocrisy.
Those are American values, the founding American values. He's just living up to, they used to be where the Republicans used to at least let the little guy get a little slice so they'd shut up and keep going to work. But
no, the Republican Party is full out now saying, we're the guys in the pockets of the fat cats, period, full stop.
Absolutely. And that was just my 2 cents.
Well, that's the tragedy, Dan, is that there are so many just average working people. When I was in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to in fact, on the air, talking to the head of one of the unions there, and he's like, we polled our members, and 53% of them voted for Trump. And it's like Trump is trying to destroy the unions.
Yep, I'm a union guy myself, and you wouldn't believe all the self-loathing. They don't mind taking the benefits for themselves and their families. They just don't want anybody else to have them.
Or they don't want to, or they don't want to pay their fair share of, the costs of having.
Oh yeah, if they could have all that for free, they would.
Right, and that's the whole right to work for less thing. That's how they destroy unions. Is they say that you don't have to pay your union dues. It's no problem. The union still has to offer you a lawyer though, anytime you ask. Dan, thanks for the call. It's nice to hear from you. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And welcome back. So a staggering 281 lobbyists. I was talking about the fundamental immorality or amorality about the Trump administration, and and how Bill Barr is basically arguing for a theocracy. But this administration, 281 lobbyists. That's pretty mind-boggling. Tim in Oak Park, Illinois. Hey, Tim, what's up? Says here you disagree with me.
I disagree with your interpretation of what a secular society is. I mean, I do believe that if it was of, by, and for the people, then we wouldn't be demanding that a single judge override the will of the people. So I think you're completely wrong. As I see it, America has devolved into a mob mentality. Whoever has the largest, most threatening mob gets to rule us for a while. And
well, wait a second. The two things you just said are completely contradictory. You're arguing that because the Supreme Court strikes down laws and things like that, the judges on the Supreme Court are essentially godlike. I would say monarchical. I would say that we have become a constitutional monarchy, frankly, and the Supreme Court are the monarchists. That's the argument I make in my book on the Supreme Court that just came out. And on the other hand, then you said we've become a mob, and which is actually the idea of democracy, majority rule, and that the idea that the Supreme Court should actually have the final say. The people who argue in favor of judicial review say we have to have that because you can't trust the mob. So you can't have it both ways, Tim.
All right, so then I agree. Thank you for helping me out there. But as I see America right now, if you are when I look at progressives, I see a very, very, very intolerant group that if I disagree with even the slightest bit of your worldview and ideologies, I have become some kind of a mental misfit. I'm phobic. I'm hateful.
Really? Who told you that?
I listen to you talk all the time, man. If I don't agree with you guys on everything, it's pretty much, hey, this guy shouldn't have a job.
Give me a quote where I said something like that, Tim.
You don't. I don't think that you're very agreeable to people that don't see your worldview, Tom. I mean, I think it's.
That may well be, Tim. But so what? I welcome people who disagree with me on this program. We reach out to I have debate conservatives constantly. Several of them have become very good friends of mine. But what's your point? Is this just this more of this kind of Republican snowflake stuff? If you feel like a victim all the time.
Oh, heck no, I'm not a victim. I just think that our republic is being turned into something completely strange and different.
I am agreeing with you on that, Tim. I just wrote a book about that. I completely agree. And I think the Supreme Court is the rod at the core of much of this stuff. Tim, thank you for the call. Hopefully we can have a civil conversation one of these days.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So 202-808-9925. Do you think that America should be a theocracy? I mean, what if Bill Barr, what if it works? He's like Mike Pence. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hurst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States, the Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hurst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, Al Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hurst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hurst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi kingdom; MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates; Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt; Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain; and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hurst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting to its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these 3 countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to two sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson. Thom Hartmann cruise will be sailing in July of 2020. The 7-day Oceania cruise will be going to Bermuda, and I'll be hosting onboard events about the topics of the day. More info at thomhartmann.com or 800-856-1155. You know, ever since Trump basically betrayed the Kurds and said to the president of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, sir, yes, sir, whatever you want, sir, just don't take away my Trump Tower or my 119 other investments in your country. Apparently, I'm speculating here, but I can't figure out why else Donald Trump would sell out the Kurds and the Christians in northern Syria. Why would he hand them over to be slaughtered? Why, you know, is it acceptable to him right now that videotapes of people being beheaded are coming out of northern Syria, and that these are Turkish troops and Turkish sympathizers who are doing the beheadings of Kurdish people who have, and Christians who have fought alongside us, or who we advised, actually. They fought instead of us. You know, 10 to 15,000 of them died on the battlefield against ISIS. And ISIS is now free and flying their flag again in Syria. Well, anyhow, I've been saying from the beginning that there's one day that may come that would be a real danger point. Syria, keep in mind, Russia has a huge military base in Syria, major, you know, they're a naval base. And it's the basis of that relationship between Putin and Assad, between Russia and Syria. So Russia has a significant, in their opinion, a significant security interest in the whole country of Syria and in its stability. It would be sort of like the way that we would feel about Qatar if it was being, you know, attacked by Iran, for example, or something like that. So they have a security interest there, and Turkey is part of NATO, which Russia views as created simply to contain Russia, which is actually the fact. And so they view NATO with a jaundiced eye. And of course, you know, when Gorbachev dissolved the Soviet Union, the deal he made with George Herbert Walker Bush, that Bush promised to, was that America would never put NATO on the border of Russia. And so here you've got, you know, the Russian-controlled Syria and NATO ally Turkey. And you know, Turkey has extended now into this 30-mile, apparently, although people say it's going as far as 50 miles, zone south of the Turkish-Syrian border. And what I said a couple of days ago was, when the Turkish troops get far enough south, they're going to encounter the Russian troops going from the south to the north. And when they encounter each other, that's NATO against Russia. And be very, very careful. I mean, NATO, you know, NATO, we're part of NATO. So if a NATO nation is under attack, we have to respond. And Syria and Russia and Iran have a similar agreement. And so, I mean, you know, if Syria is under attack, Russia could, you know, may have to respond. I mean, this is how World War I happened. Okay, so that's the background, and here's where I was going with all this. This article just went up in the Financial Times, ft.com. The headline, it's by Henry Foy in Moscow, Laura Patel in Ankara, and Chloe Cornish in Beirut. It was posted 1 hour ago. The headline, Russia calls Turkey's invasion of North Syria, quote, unacceptable. And I'll just read to you the first couple of sentences. Russia deployed troops in northeastern Syria. So here we go. Russia deployed troops in northeastern Syria to help reassert control over the territory in the wake of Turkey's military onslaught against Kurdish forces. Russia labeled Ankara's, you know, Ankara being the capital of Turkey, basically. So it's Russia labeled Turkey's incursion, quote, unacceptable. Alexander Lavrentiev, President Vladimir Putin's special envoy for Syria, said on Tuesday that Ankara's offensive had not been agreed to with Russia, despite the Kremlin having emerged as the most influential foreign power in Syria. So, Russia wins the most in this thing, but they're saying, no, this is not what we wanted. In the harshest comments, back to the Financial Times, in the harshest comments yet from a Russian official, Mr. Lavrentiev said that Moscow, quote, has always believed that any military operation in Syrian territory is unacceptable. And he said this, and so here we are, the border between Turkey and Syria. He said that border, quote, should be ensured by way of deploying government forces along the entire border. In other words, he wants Assad to put his soldiers there to stop the Turks. This could be really, really, really dangerous. Anyhow, to your calls. Z in Los Angeles. Hey, Z, what's up?
Hi. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you on the radio, and this is the first time I called. And I have a question and a comment. I hope we can get them both in. I don't quite understand the connections of how the Christian groups support Trump. Is it just the guns? Is there more to it?
Yeah, there is.
He's doing so many things that are so unchristian-like.
Yeah. Well, you keep in mind the Christianity is an industry in the United States as much as anything else. I mean, when I ran the Community for Abused Kids, in 1980 I went to the National Religious Broadcasters Association, the NRBA, to their annual convention in I think it was in Washington D.C. that year, and I was in the room when Robert Schiller gave a speech that turned him into an outcast. There were about 1,000 people there. There were all these booths. I mean, it was a trade show on, how here you can get, holy blessed cloths that you can, send to people on the radio or on television for their $10 donations. I mean, it's literally an industry. And Robert Schiller got up and he quoted, I think it was Isaiah, where he was talking about, you have become a ravening wolf and you are eating your sheep. And he quoted Jesus too in that context. And the room was just stunned. I mean, he got no applause. It was just silence. And this was just before the Jim Baker scandals. But it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And what Trump has promised them is that this amendment to the tax code that Lyndon Johnson pushed for back in the 1950s when he was a senator from Texas, it's referred to as the Johnson Amendment. That amendment to the tax code says that if you are a church or any other 501c3, a religious or an educational organization, and you're tax exempt, you're not paying taxes, so you're getting free fire and free police and free everything, right? You don't have to contribute to the public good. You don't have to help the schools, any of that stuff. You're getting all that for free. In exchange for that, don't involve yourself in politics. And if you do involve yourself in politics, you can lose your tax exempt status. And Trump has said he wants to do away with that. And these literally multi-million and billion-dollar outfits, Liberty University and Jerry Falwell and the remnants of the Billy Graham, his son Franklin, the remnants of the Billy Graham empire, and you've got numerous televangelists who are multimillionaires. And they would love to be able to involve themselves in politics, get closer to power. Well, in fact, they do. They're defying the IRS right now. So that's what's up, Z. You had a comment?
And the comment was, it kind of triggered when you called him abominable. It triggered my memory something that Marianne Williamson said that really impacted me. Someone asked her the question about how do you approach all the Trump supporters, and Hillary called them deplorables, which really cost her. And she said, I'm not going to shame them for their beliefs or their support. Yeah. And I thought that was really, really beautiful, incredible, in fact.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I absolutely agree. Yep. Z, thank you very much for the call. I've got to move along, but thank you. Lynn in Waynesboro, Virginia. Lynn, you're on the air.
Okay. Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk to you briefly about the theocracy issue, following up with your last caller as well. I heard the comments from Bill Barr, and it was very reminiscent of the secular humanism issue that I guess back in probably late 70s, early 80s
when politicians started raving about it, it was the 1980s, and it was the Reaganistas.
Yeah, okay. And I remember that well, but it just sort of clicked for me. You know, so you're talking to this last lady about the industry, and certainly many of them are power hungry and greedy, but there's some who are zealots, and I think they're the scarier ones. And Bill Barr confused me, and I will admit that I had him pegged wrong, like a lot of other people in the beginning, but because he's going back to the 80s and that whole thing. You know, it's almost like he's trying to pick up. He saw an opening to come in and pick up where they left off. But I do think that disconnect with people questioning how could Christians support him. That for some people like Barr, I wonder if it's just that Trump is just so lax. I mean, certainly the specifics like the tax issue and all that's one thing. But he's just so lax and selfish that he'll take
they've got a rationale.
Yeah,
forgive my interruption, but we've got like 30 seconds here. They've got a rationale around this. They've got this story that has been built, you know, that there was this King Cyrus who was not a Jew, but he helped the Jews when they were being persecuted, and therefore he was blessed by God and a wonderful guy and all this stuff, even though he was an awful, evil SOB, you know, who wasn't faithful to his wife or his family or his country or anything. But he helped out the Jews, and and so the Christians are adopting that, and they're saying, okay, just like Cyrus helped the Jewish people back in the day, Trump is going to help the Christian people right now. He's our King Cyrus, and it's a bizarre, kind of pathetic attempt to accommodate this kind of sociopathy, this pathological behavior that we're seeing on the part of this guy. Lynn, thank you for the call, which is actually quite dangerous behavior as well. I mean, he just set up what might be the flashpoint that could conceivably lead to World War III in the Middle East. This is not good stuff. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And I will be picking up your calls right after the break. Stick around. And welcome back. And James in Dallas, Texas. Hey, James, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Well, my thought was if there's no black agenda in terms of representing or trying to enhance the reparations packet for the American descendant of slaves or foundational black folks, I don't want you. I remember the first debate with Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and back in the day, and they all asked them, who here is for reparations? Nobody raised their hands. Kucinich was the only one from Iowa.
Well, I think at one of the last debates they asked that question, and as I recall, everybody raised their hands except maybe Andrew Yang. I'm not sure.
No. Bernie Sanders, none of them raised their hands. They said they want something for everybody. Okay, we've really been watching this issue. All right, and my thing is that if you're not going to do that, then and when it came down to immigrants and illegal immigrants getting health care, boy, everybody raised their hands. Like that's okay. And I'm just tired of us as black folks who have already been here for 400 years being passed over, and it's not going to happen anymore. And if they're not going to do that, if people aren't watching black media in general, you're just wrong. Don't call yourself a progressive or all that great if you don't even know what foundational black people even want. If you don't know what an American descendant of slave wants, don't call yourself progressive.
Okay, I get the movement. James, thank you. Sharon in Los Gatos, California. Hey, Sharon, what's up?
Good morning, afternoon, probably, huh?
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's morning here. Yeah.
Pushed all my buttons, but some of your callers ahead of me sort of took care of all of my issues in a way. And theocracy? Oh God, no.
Yeah.
From my perspective, religion is truly what's the matter. It's not what the teachings are. It's how we handle as human beings. And I see so much that is so anti any religion that I've ever ventured into. And I'm basically a Christian. I believe in Christ and his teachings, but I don't see any of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I say I'm a Christian who would not be welcome in a lot of Christian churches.
No, they'll throw me out. Yeah. or no, they wouldn't do that. They would do something else. Anyway, And the thing is that this group bunch that's in the that's actually his horses that he rode in on. I mean, does anybody ever talk about the fact that oh gosh, the names have gone out. I got so upset. My names are all going out of my. Anyway, Betsy DeVos is related. Her brother is Eric Prince,
right? Who started Blackwater?
Yes, and and they're Calvinists, to my understanding is.
Yes.
And my understanding of Calvinism is that they're the only ones that get to live. Everybody else should die.
Well, I don't know enough about Calvinism to speak to that, but I do know that the kind of reinvented John Calvin theocracy or theological argument is that we're all sinners, but we've got to but God gives us clues as to who we should have as leading us, who is without sin or who has less sin. And the way that God tells us that is because they're rich people. And therefore, rich people should run the world. And Betsy DeVos is a great example of that. Sharon, thanks a lot for the call. It's such a weird idea. And yet it is, with or without the religious piece, it's at the core of the Republican argument for their own existence. We'll be right back. So nuclear power is... Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Continuing our conversations, Kathy in Crystal Lake, Illinois. Hey, Kathy, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
I was really disturbed by the speech that Mike Pompeo gave over the weekend, and equally disturbed by the speech that Barr gave at Notre Dame, I think the law school. And there's a theme running here, and it's interesting that they did this really within a couple of days each other. So I got a question for you. I'm really interested. Why do you think Bill Barr, who is pretty crooked, unscrupulous, but obviously knows the law, why is he still carrying Trump's water, and why is Pompeo still carrying? Pompeo is not a stupid guy. He was number one at West Point in his class.
Yeah.
What do you think is behind this? Because I think I've talked to you before, you probably don't remember, but we've talked about this slow-rolling coup that I think is going on.
Yeah.
I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist.
I think that they're... no, I get it. I think that their motivations are somewhat different. Mike Pompeo is an insanely ambitious, and apparently his wife is really, really, kind of drives him. He's a very, very ambitious guy. And I think that he's hanging out with Trump because he thinks that's going to help him if he wants to run, for example, for the Senate, from Kansas.
I know that he believes in the rapture, too, though.
Yeah.
And that's kind of frightening.
But Pompeo professes to be a fundamentalist Christian, and may well be. But Barr, I think his motivation, I don't think he's trying to become president or anything else. I don't think he has any interest in running for public office. I think that he is he actually believes in theocracy. I think I think he's an Opus Dei Catholic. I think, I don't know that for a fact. I know that, most of the members of the Supreme Court are now Opus Dei Catholics. And I think that, which is this fundamentalist sect within Catholicism, that, you could say argues in favor of theocracy, and then of course you've got the family, and there's a brilliant documentary, Jeff Sharlow's documentary that you can watch on Netflix about the family. It's 5 parts, and it's just breathtaking, mind-boggling. And so I think the Barr is doing this because he actually does not believe in democracy. I think that's why he supported, Reagan and Bush back in the day, was because they were all about, liberating the churches also. The guy who was the outreach director for the Reagan campaign was George W. Bush. He brought the evangelicals into the Reagan campaign when Reagan was, he had been divorced and all this kind of stuff. I mean, he was not their squeaky clean, Christian, but again, they were using the Cyrus defense. So I think that's what's going on.
So I'm thinking that Barr is a perfect person in terms of the slow rolling coup, because if the Supreme Court rules and says, you have to honor the subpoenas, you've got to give over documents, who is going to enforce this?
That's correct. Everything goes through Bill Barr, and that's why I think some of the people in Congress are re-examining the levels of their authority via the Capitol Police and things like that. Kathy, I have to move along, but thank you for the call. Matthew in Surrey, Virginia. Hey, Matthew, what's up?
How you doing, sir? Good morning from Virginia.
Thank you. What's up?
I'm very interested in your book on the Supreme Court. I don't think many Americans know exactly the special laws that are given to Supreme Court justices, and I think if you want to see real reform in this country, not only regarding term limits to Supreme Court justices, but term limits in general, is one of the main basic ways you're going to reform this country as a whole. And seeing this thing going on with this inquisition with Trump and Adam Schiff, it kind of reminds me, I've been through the federal process myself, went to federal trial, and the grand jury process to me is what I'm seeing. If you actually knew how a grand jury works, it's very, very one-sided. And I just wanted your
it's all about coming up with a prosecution, and that's the thing. I mean, Trump is saying, "Oh, I can't represent myself, and I can't see the witnesses against me, and all this kind of stuff." Well, that's how grand juries work. You will be able to, as Ted Lieu tweeted to Trump today, to one of Trump's whiny complaints, one of his little snowflake things. Ted Lieu tweets back, "You'll have plenty of opportunity to have your side of the story presented at your trial." I mean, that'll happen in the Senate, but there'll be a trial, and Trump can present all his evidence, and he can refute all the arguments and accusations. That's what it's for. So just hang on, Matthew. It's coming. Well, most of them are closed hearings, actually. But just chill out. We'll get there. Thomas in New York City. Hey, Thomas, what's on your mind?
Oh, Tom, how you doing?
Good.
Listen, I love your show, man, but I just wanted to give you my theory on the reason why Trump is doing what he's doing now.
Okay.
My reason is I believe he know he's going down, and he want to take the whole world with him. That's the reason he's doing what he's doing.
That's the thing that scares me the most,
Tom,
that he's like
taking my call.
Yeah.
And you're good. Okay.
Thank you, Thomas.
I'm gonna hang up now.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Thomas. Good to talk with you. That's my biggest fear, and I've alluded to it. I mean, I refer to that speech I gave in Minneapolis last year, where I just came right out and said it. And I'll say it right now. My biggest fear is that Donald Trump may have a little Jim Jones in him. And if he decides that, if he concludes that he and his crime family are going to go down, he may be willing to take the entire world with him. He's obviously willing to take the United States with him. He's taking apart the United States right now. I mean, the damage that he is doing to this country. But will he take down the entire world? Is he willing to start a nuclear war? It's obvious he's willing to do things like what he did with Syria that could lead to a nuclear war without asking the advice of his military, without asking the advice of the Pentagon, without asking the advice of the State Department. Just doing what foreign dictators tell him to do. That's scary as hell. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I've grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue the idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it, not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We have a Democratic debate coming up tonight. We've been talking about what we're anticipating, hoping to avoid. Of course, you know, it's a commercial network. The League of Women Voters stopped doing these debates in 1988 because they said that the two political parties wanted to turn them into charades and sports events, basically. And that they would not participate with the charade. I think we should bring them back. We've been talking about that. We've been talking about the lobbyists, the alligators in the swamp. Today is also the anniversary of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, a revolutionary political organization. It was started in 1965 in Oakland, spread around the world, and ended in 1982 as a result of a campaign from the FBI director and others. Pretty grim history. The most iconic of the Panther services included a free breakfast program, which eventually a lot of public schools, in fact most I think, picked up and said, oh yeah, we can do this. And patrols, armed patrols of police to make sure that black people were not being abused by the police. Obviously a problem that we still have. So if the Black Panther Party was to be reinvented, the one that Fox News talks about is, you know, these three guys in, I think, Philadelphia. But there is no actual formal Black Panther Party right now. If it was reinvented, how should it be reinvented? What should it look like? How should it work? We've been talking about Donald Trump and how weak he is, how fundamentally weak he is. And Paul Krugman really nails this today with these, basically the charades that are going on. Pete Buttigieg took a shot at Elizabeth Warren, and it kind of blew up on his face. He was on Good Luck America, a political news show on Snapchat. And they brought up the fact that Elizabeth Warren and, you know, the two biggest fundraisers so far of the Democratic primary have been Bernie at $46 million and Warren at $35 million. And Buttigieg said, quote, "We're not going to beat Trump with pocket change." He was, you know, defending having wealthy donors. 51% of his contributions are large donors, large donations. Whereas, you know, with Warren and Sanders, there are no large dollar donors. They take only small dollar donors. And Buttigieg also took a shot at Beto O'Rourke. He said, I get it. He needs to pick a fight in order to stay relevant. He's talking about Beto saying that, yeah, we're going to come and take your guns. if you've got assault weapons. I think it's very interesting that Buttigieg is feeling that he has to, do that. Well, we'll see what happens tonight. We'll see what happens tonight. It's going to be real interesting. I mentioned a staggering 281 lobbyists are now working inside the Trump administration. And the main thing that we've learned about Fiona Hill's testimony, the Russia expert who fled the State Department, who was there at the time that Trump made his phone call to, with the president of Turkey. She said that the whole let's get Rudy Giuliani to do skeezy stuff in Ukraine, that this goes back to March. So March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, 10 months? So it goes way back, or 8 months, whatever that is. I wasn't counting on my fingers. I should have been 7. Thank you, Sean. And it was so skeezy, it was so bad, it was so obviously illegal that John Bolton left over it, or at least it was a large part of why he left. When John Bolton is the rational guy, you've got a serious problem. Amazing. Anyhow, Carl in New York City, listening to BAI. Hey, Carl, what's up? Carl?
Go by.
Okay, I'm not hearing Carl. Carl's on line 4, Louise, if you want to check that out. Robert in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Robert, thanks for listening to 1260 AM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Great show. First-time caller, calling from Santa Fe. And a pretty simple question. With Donald Trump and all the improprieties and all the problems and all the criminal offenses and all this, why is it so difficult to dislodge 3 years into this illegitimate presidency? Why is it so hard and difficult to dislodge this guy?
I think a large chunk of the problem is our media, Robert. Our media put Trump in the White House, and we have the CEO of CBS, on tape saying, keep it up, Donald. It may be bad for America, but it's great for CBS, or the ex-president of CBS. I think that it's to the extent that Donald Trump keeps churning the news cycle. Now that news is a for-profit business rather than an obligation in order to keep your license, the news has become infotainment, and thus we get Trump. A, B, thus we get debates that are really not about digging into the issues. They're about people blood sports stuff. This is a problem, and it's a problem that we need to address. And we definitely need to. Julia in Vacaville, California. Hey, Julia, what's up?
Hi, how are you today?
I'm well. I hope you are too.
Good. Yeah, I'm hanging in there. I'm so glad that somebody is finally speaking to the Pence and the evangelicals, people that are calling themselves Christians.
Yeah, it's Pence and Barr right now seems to be the ringleaders.
Yeah, well, here's the problem. They may call themselves Christians, but they are not. I am truly a Christ follower. And you're right about something I just heard you say, which on a YouTube thing, was that if you were to talk about Jesus, he would definitely be more of a liberal than a conservative. And he was the problem with people like Mike Pence and that grouping is that they don't really know the Bible. Right. They talk all this garbage, but they don't know the Bible. Because if you knew the Bible, there's verse after verse in the Bible that tells you you're to welcome the stranger. Yeah. You are to help the poor. Yeah. You are. It's over and over. It tells it again and again. And I want the gentleman that you just had before. I want to say something to him, and I want y'all to. Then you'll probably think I'm crazy, but that's okay. Here's the thing: the reason that Donald Trump is being able to hold on and nothing seems to stick to him is very simple. We are in the last days, and I believe this 100%. And he is the Bible talks about Satan as the lawless one. They use that phrase. And when he talks about who will be in going into hell, it will be liars. And it does say that people that are gay or choose that sex life. But it doesn't say that, you can't repent from that at the end. Your last breath.
Julia, we're getting pretty granular here. If you're saying that you think that what's going on right now is the last days and God's allowing Donald Trump to be the crazy man because
I don't know. I'm not
or
saying
he's the beast or the whore. The two words, the two people who at the very end are collaborating to bring about the end of time. I'm not enough of a theologian to agree or disagree with you, but I do agree that when the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and the Attorney General, Bill Barr, are all giving public speeches about how government should be informed by, run by, supervised by, interpenetrated with a particular sect of one particular religion, I think we have a serious problem. This is not a good thing. David in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, David, what's in your mind?
Hello, Tom. I just wanted one thing to happen tonight in the Democratic debate is a strong rebuke of offshore banking. I don't understand why Hillary and Obama did what they did, and I would like to hear Biden say that he would rescind the Panama Free Trade Agreement, amongst others.
Yeah. I think that's a subset of this whole much larger issue of corruption that the Democrats are pointing out, and correctly so. Thank you, David, for the call. And I go way beyond offshore banking. I think we need to radically change our laws, and we need to go back to the separation of commercial banks from what do you call them? Investment banks. I mean, if we don't separate these, we're really screwed.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we're seeing right now, the repo market freezing up overnight, the Fed saying that all the way into the second quarter next year, they're going to be manufacturing money every month. This is grim stuff. And welcome back. Let's see here. Virginia in Seattle. Hey, Virginia. Thanks for waiting on hold. What's up?
Oh, hi. I think you're right. It's lots and lots of really grim stuff. And I don't know. I go back to when he first became President, Trump, and I read David K. Johnson's books on Trump. Mm-hmm. And I think the guy has a really, really good hold on him. And the first thing I thought of after reading them is this guy's going to start a war to be able to maintain presidency.
Well, it's what in 2012, I believe, or whichever year. Let's see, 2012, when Obama was running for re-election. Several times that year, Trump tweeted that Obama was going to start a war with Iran in order to get himself reelected. So we know that Trump thinks that's what. Yeah. So we know that, and he was on TV saying it too. So we know that Trump thinks that that's what presidents do in order to get reelected. And in fact, that was George W. Bush's strategy. He told his biographer in 1999, before he even announced he was running, that if he became president, he was going to have a war that was going to last longer than his daddy's war, because his daddy's war didn't last until the election, which is why his daddy lost the election. We saw this with Reagan with his little war in Grenada to try to get himself reelected in '84. He was following on Maggie Thatcher, having done the same thing in the Falklands, and going, oh, well, that seems to work. Richard Nixon had his war in Vietnam. It's just I'm very concerned, Virginia, that if Trump thinks that starting a war is the way to hold on to the White House, that it's just so dangerous.
I think that's what is starting. I think he's starting to get ready for that war and I think it's probably Iran. And it didn't used to bother me so much because I thought, the Congress will stop him. It's okay. Well, they won't stop him. They don't stop him.
Well, we'll see. They're
really
talking. I agree with you, and it does concern me. It's not paralyzing me, but it does concern me. But they're talking in the Senate about passing a resolution condemning, what's going on in Syria, and thus implicitly condemning Trump. A resolution isn't going to do anything. They need to cut the budget of the Pentagon or something, or they need. There are remedies that are available. Virginia, thank you for the call. You raise a really important issue. David in Tyler, Texas. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. You can put your mouth a little closer to the microphone, but yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yes, Trump's coming to town, just west of Dallas on Thursday.
All right.
And Beto is sending out, asking for a lot of people to come, that he's going to have a counter rally close by.
Good.
And,
he's the guy to do it.
So today, all of a sudden, I'm hearing from some of the Texas papers and stuff about militias, right-wing militias forming and heading that way, too.
Oh, no.
So, a group of us, we were heavy working on Beto's behalf when he was running against Cruz, and just how safe these things are.
Yeah.
Or how controllable they are. I mean, I'm used to way back in the 60s. I'm 73 years old, and I still want to do it. And but now I'm like,
I'm with you, David. David, I gotta run, but we'll see. We will see. We'll see how far the right is going to go. We'll see how far the left is going to go. I hope that there is no violence. I really, sincerely, genuinely hope that we can get out of this thing okay. So there's a new paper out from Breakthrough, the National Center for Climate Restoration in Australia. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Oh, my, what a day. So, Peter in Waldorf, Virginia. Hey, Peter, what's on your mind? Peter, you're on the air.
Tom?
Yeah. Pick it up quick. Peter, I'm going to put you back on hold, and you can negotiate with Louise what's going on. Peter's on line 4 there. Tracy in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, you were just speaking to me as Peter, but it was Tracy. I was trying to get you. I just had a few questions. I've been watching you because I'm trying to get, different perspectives on things today. I watch different channels and stuff, and I kind of agree with some of the stuff you say, but every now and then you contradict yourself. Like, one day you said that the president didn't know how to run a business, and he had bankrupt. And then you said that Turkey was giving him $500 billion. And then today you were talking about how he...
Turkey gives him $5 million. It was the Trump Tower project was $1 billion project, but he just licensed his name to it. It's owned by his business partner in Turkey, who's the richest man in Turkey. Yeah.
So either he's a
my
good
point is that
or he's not.
Well, he's a successful businessman when he's committing crimes. When he's laundering money, when he's dealing with foreign oligarchs. He's a successful businessman in a way that most businessmen in America and women in America would never consider doing. He's a grifter. But he's had the vast majority of his companies have failed. He's been through 5 or 6 bankruptcies now. He failed in the casino business, which is something that I don't think anybody in history has ever done before. He pled guilty to fraud, to running a criminally fraudulent organization with his so-called online Trump University, and paid a $25 million fine in addition to acknowledging that he was a fraudster. I mean, take your choice, Tracy. I mean, he's a successful grifter or he's an unsuccessful businessman. I mean, I don't think they're dissonant. I don't think they contradict each other.
Okay, and then about him not leaving the White House if he loses. You were saying something about how...
Well, I'm not the one who brought that up. That was his lawyer, Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen testified before Congress that he believes that Trump has so little respect for the law and tradition that there will be violence if he is, when the time comes for him to leave the White House. A, he may well not leave, and B, he may call on the people who he has praised in the past, the relatively violent people, the very good, those white people carrying the torches in Virginia. He will call on those kinds of groups to keep him in power, which would be a military coup. It would be the end of the government of the United States of America. I think that's possible, but I'm not the one who posited it. It was his lawyer testifying under oath before Congress. His lawyer, who's now in jail, by the way, for committing a crime that Donald Trump instructed him to do, which is paying off Stormy Daniels. It's a violation of the campaign finance laws.
Oh, I thought he went to jail for lying.
He went to jail for about 5 different things. One of them has to do with the Stormy Daniels stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Tracy, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Lars in Seattle. Hey, Lars, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Listen, I wanted to talk about a corollary in history. About 100 years ago, there was I just read this book called The Plot to Seize the White House, and it's about this guy named Smedley Butler.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah, War is a Racket was his book. And it's an amazing story, isn't it, Lars? How these rich guys got together and they said they were going to raise an army, and they were doing it through one of the veterans organizations of 500,000 men. And Smedley Butler, who is the most famous general in American history at the time, he was like the way that people thought of Eisenhower in 1953.
Right. He was on his way to becoming the commandant of the Marine Corps.
Yeah, I mean, he was the most famous military guy ever, and these very wealthy, oligarchs came to him and said, "We're going to overthrow the government of Franklin Roosevelt, and we'd like your help, and we'd like you to lead the military coup." And he outed them, and it led to a couple of weeks of congressional hearings. And then FDR put his foot down and said, "I don't want this to go any further. I don't want people talking like this. I don't want to give anybody any ideas. We're just going to deep six this thing." But Smedley Butler wrote about it. He wrote a book about it.
He was a famous whistleblower.
Yeah.
And if he hadn't come forward and blown the whistle on the whole thing, we'd probably be sitting under a fascist government like American Mussolini.
Well, and this is, I mean, the previous caller who said, "Well, wait a minute, what if, I don't understand why you said Trump won't leave." And I said, "Well, Michael Cohen said that." But, this is what we're hearing from the militias, and this has also been reported as well, that some of these right-wing militias are saying we're ready for a civil war, essentially, and we're well armed. And this is, fundamentally, it's not an American message. It isn't the way that America. Well, maybe it is. I mean, we had a civil war, right? We went through this, but I thought that we learned some lessons from it. Lars, I got to run, but thanks for the call. And I really hope that we learned some lessons from it, because a civil war would be the very worst thing that could happen. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Our book today is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America by Greg Grandin. And this is from Chapter 1, entitled All That Space. The British colonies in North America were conceived in expansion. America was an aspiration, an errand, and an obligation born out of violent Christian schism and Europe's interminable religious and imperial conflicts. Depending on the intricacies of their particular interpretations of Revelation, the Protestants who settled New England might have understood flight across the Atlantic as a way of escaping European war, or they might have seen migration as a chance to open a new front and win those wars on a new soil. Here in the 1600s, in the eschatological nebula of the New World, was the first paradoxical image of America as simultaneously pristine and despoiled, empty and at the same time filled with primitives begging for deliverance, subordinated to Catholic Spain, which had conquered its part of the Americas a century earlier and stood as the great obstacle to Reformation England's rise as a world power. All yell and cry with one voice, Libertia, Libertia. Richard Hakluyt, a clergyman and court minister, wrote in the late 1500s, hoping to convince investors and his queen to establish an American colony. As Puritan society frayed under the harsh conditions of settler life, the frontier threatened and beckoned. The dark woods were filled with witches, and they were witchy, inviting hither. The forest was the place where the community could be redeemed and given new purpose, a chance to once again start anew, or it could be a place of more sorrows, wilderness sorrows, as two early Puritan patriarchs described the hardships that awaited those who ventured into uncharted territory, where whatever solidarity existed would be smashed into atoms as settlers scattered to escape the rule of the clergy. People are ready to run wild into the woods again and to be as heathenish as ever, warned Increase Mather. Expansions could be, often in the same sermon, held up as the cause of and the solution to the difficulties of establishing Christian communities. Either way, Native Americans had to get out of the way. They could die. They waste, they molder away, they disappear, said one Puritan chronicler of indigenous people who had succumbed to European pestilence years before the arrival of the Mayflower in 1620, thus clearing the earth for the establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. God made way for his people by removing the heathen and planting them in the ground, said another observer. They could be murdered. The holy terror unleashed by the Puritans was, according to the historian Bernard Bailyn, driven by fears of what could happen to civilized people in an unimaginable wilderness and fears of racial conflicts in which God's children were fated to struggle with pitiless agents of Satan, pagan antichrists swarming in the world around them. Survivors could be enslaved. The first patent granted in colonial America in 1626 was to a Virginia merchant and planter, William Claiborne, for inventing a device that would not just restrain Indians, but also make them work. Claiborne was given an Indian to experiment on for the trial of his invention. Colonial records do not say what this innovation might have been, only noting that it was not successful. Or they could be pushed further and further west. The prodigious and relentless population, complained New Orleans Spanish governor in 1794, progressively drives the Indian nations before them and upon us, seeking to possess for itself this vast continent which the Indians occupy between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Appalachian Mountains. More than a century and a half later, writing in the early 1950s, the Mexican author and diplomat Octavio Paz made much the same point. America was, he writes, if anything, geography, pure space, open to human action. Since it lacked historical substance, ancient social classes, established institutions, religions, and hereditary laws, reality presented no obstacles other than natural ones. Men struggled not against history, but against nature. And wherever there was an historical obstacle, indigenous societies say, it was simply erased from history, reduced to a mere natural fact and dispensed with accordingly. Evil is outside, part of the natural world, like Indians, rivers, mountains, and other obstacles that must be domesticated or destroyed. End of quote. The American Revolution is a permanent revolution, Paz went on, a nonstop expulsion of, quote, all elements foreign to the American essence and a constant invention of itself. And anything that stands in the way of that invention, anything that is in any way irreducible or inassimilable to perpetual creation, be it Native American, Spanish America, or history itself, quote, is not American. Quote, in other places, the future is one of man's attributes because we are men. We have a future. In Saxon America, the process is inverted and the future determines the man. We are men because we are the future, and everything that has no future is not a man. End of quote. The United States, Paz said, offers no room for contradictions, ambiguity, or conflict. The nation flies forward swiftly, as if weightless across the land. Trying to stop North Americans moving west, Stephen Austin, the founder of Texas, said over a century earlier, was like trying to stop the Mississippi with a dam of straw. The drive west waxed and waned and burst forward with great passion during key moments. The book, The Edge of the Myth, by Greg Grandin. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
What a day. What an amazing day. Rudy Giuliani just announced that he's having I guess he's got two divorces going on. He's got one divorce going on with his wife and his, I think, third wife, and, which is, I'll just leave that there. But he's also divorcing with his lawyer. Now, we don't know whether he fired his lawyer or whether his lawyer fired him. But his personal lawyer, the guy who might protect him if he's charged with crimes as a consequence of what he's been doing here, that guy just bailed on him. So it's getting interesting out there. Henry in Fort Lauderdale. Hey, Henry, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I am a retired person. I used to be a banker for a long time. I see that we're exposed to all kind of information regarding how good the economy is doing and which doesn't really reflect in the people around me. Mm-hmm. I don't know, seeing how the federal employees are exposed to all kind of pressures from the government and, from the administration. I ask myself, should we really give credit to all the statistics that, we see every day, like about the growth of the economy? How can this be manipulated by these people? And right. Is this possible? I remember the last big recession we had, 10 years ago or more, mm-hmm. How Standard & Poor used to give these bonds a AAA rating when they weren't even worth the paper.
Yeah, the rating agencies were basically being paid off, and I think that they've put an end to that practice. There's been some legislative interventions and there's been some practice interventions, but Trump just rolled back some of those regulations on the banks to the very, very largest banks. I mean, it's and this was just a couple of days ago. It was in the Financial Times. I think, Henry, the problem is that gross domestic product does not measure, and Bobby Kennedy made this point, years and years ago. In fact, I may even have it. No, I guess I don't have it on my clip machine. But anyhow, Bobby Kennedy made the point that the GDP, doesn't. It doesn't measure the right things, right? Positive or negative. When a forest fire happens, GDP goes up because people have to recover from the fire. When a flood happens, GDP goes up because people have to rebuild. When there's disasters, GDP actually goes up weirdly.
But my point is,
it doesn't measure wellness.
My point is, how could we possibly think that these numbers, this figure that they send us, right, or that we hear on the news, can be manipulated by the.
Oh, they can, but it's the nature of the system is that they don't even really need to manipulate it. Unemployment is at a historic low. It's back down where it was in 1969 at around 3%. But in 1969. You could live on the minimum wage. In 1969, you could put yourself through a major university working a part-time job. I did for a short while. I didn't graduate, but I did. My wife did graduate, and she did it. I mean, and she was a waitress in a Howard Johnson's, and I was changing tires and pumping gas at an Eshoo station, and I worked as a cook at Bob's Big Boy. You could do that, and so what has happened is
there couldn't be manipulation of.
Well, all the other metrics have shifted. But the bottom line is, Henry, yeah, there's a lot of jobs around. They're crappy jobs. There's no benefits. They don't pay. Is $7.25 is still the federal minimum wage. It's less than a third of what the minimum wage was in 1969 rather, in terms of buying power. So, they're using statistics to talk about how wonderful things are, but they're really only wonderful for the ownership class in the top 1%. And
but
that's
how
people
reliable are these statistics?
I think they're reasonably reliable. There's 6 different measurements of unemployment, and over the last couple of administrations, they've changed exactly what they say this is unemployment and this isn't, kind of thing. Discouraged workers or not discouraged workers, or at what point do you stop counting people who are looking for a job, even if they're still looking for a job? Do you stop counting it at a year? Do you stop counting it 2 years? Why should you stop counting it at all? That's why you've got E1 or Q1, I guess it is, through Q6. But anyway, I'm ranting here. Chad in St. Louis. Hey, Chad, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to go back to the Pete Buttigieg story that you were talking about. He was on Snapchat's Good Luck America. I just was curious. Did you see the actual story that he did, or was it a article?
No, I was reading an article about it on Daily Kos.
Daily Kos, okay. Perfect example. I watched the Good Luck America story, and it didn't come off at all what you portrayed, at all.
Okay.
And so, it's just a very funny point to me that, he answered in a very Pete way. I like Pete. I don't think he's the answer for us. But as much as I'm willing to criticize anybody else who does it, especially.
So when he said that Beto was staying, said, "Hell yes, I'll take your guns," it was a stunt because he was failing in the polls. He didn't actually mean that?
No, it was more about the Elizabeth point, I think.
So when he said you're not going to get reelected with chump change. Well, I don't disagree with that, and I think whoever our candidate is, even if they're like Bernie and Elizabeth Warren have both committed to only taking small dollar donations, they're going to have. Right. There's going to be a swarm of super PACs around them that are going to be taking big donations, and they're not going to be able to do anything about it. And frankly, I'm not opposed to using the weapons of the enemy to defeat the enemy.
Absolutely. It's a funny thing. I was very just curious about where you had read it from, because it was almost like it was 2 stories, and I thought it's just something fun. It's just something different to point out, because I do turn to you for the real on it. And I thought this is something Tom should know, because now to kind of be a little weary of Daily Kos and maybe. When they're secondhand reporting. Well, or check primary sources, which I usually do. But thank you, Chad. Mark in Las Vegas. Hey, Mark, what's up? Mark? I'm not hearing Mark. Mark's on line 7, Louise, if you want to check that out. The CF in Tazewell, Tennessee. Hey, CF, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I watch your show every day, and I appreciate you taking my call. You seem to be very well informed on a lot of issues, and I appreciate that a whole lot, trust me.
Thanks, it's my job.
And my question to you, since you are well informed, is I was wondering what your thoughts is about the future of Trump and what is really going to happen here, if there's actually an impeachment going to happen or not, and if it does, what do we do then? I'll hang up and listen. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks a lot, CF. I think, frankly, that if Donald Trump, if the articles of impeachment coming out of the House are as strong as it looks like they're going to be, and if the Republicans in the Senate, the ones who are in vulnerable seats, if they don't see a serious primary challenger, it's going to take 20 Republicans out of the 51 I think they have. It's going to take 20 of them to join the Democrats to remove him from office. And I think Mitt Romney and Ben Sass and perhaps even Cory Gardner, who's afraid of the election there in Colorado, I think they've all and Mitt Romney's not afraid of anything because his seat is totally safe in Utah. And I think, frankly, Mitt Romney wants to run for president in 2020. I had been assuming 2024 up until last week, but I think he's looking at 2020. So I think that Trump gets impeached in the House, it goes to the Senate. If those senators are no longer afraid of a primary battle, they will probably vote to impeach him. I think that the stakes. I think the Syria thing actually was probably the bridge too far for many of them, and maybe even Lindsey Graham. I don't know. We'll see. But I think it's a very good question. Cassandra in White Plains, New York. Hey, Cassandra.
Oh, hi. Good afternoon, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I was wondering, do you think Trump might be a flight risk?
I do.
I mean, everybody's talking about a coup, but Trump is not a strong man. I mean, he's a rich boy coward. I mean, he's got those 2 towers with his names on them in Istanbul, and he had those 2 confiscations with Erdogan. I'd want to know if, like any other dictator, he's going to flee from the country.
I think it's entirely possible.
I'm wondering if
it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Turkey has an extradition treaty with us. I mean, we have not extradited the cleric they want extradited.
Right.
Does Trump think he's got cover in Turkey?
That's an interesting question. And will he arrest and ship the blind pastor back over to Turkey if he decides that he really wants to throw in with Erdogan? I'm guessing that my guess would be that he'd end up in Moscow, but who knows? I mean, it's entirely possible that Donald Trump has a nest feathered someplace else, and then the question is, is Ivanka and Jared going to go with them? Because I think when the stories really seriously come out, they're going to go down just as hard as Donald Trump, and the same thing with, at the very least, Don Jr., who now thinks that he's going to run for the Senate.
If he's not reelected, I mean, he's going to be prosecuted.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, now you've got one judge last week who said that this whole Office of the Legal Counsel thing that says that you can't prosecute a sitting president, that's not legal. It wasn't any sort of legislative body that said that. It was a guy who worked for President Nixon who said that, and then a guy who worked for Bill Clinton when he was being impeached who wrote a concurring opinion, and these 2 men were, they worked for the 2 presidents who were being impeached, and they said, oh, well, impeachment is the only solution. You can't prosecute criminally. Well, there's nothing in the Constitution that says that. There's nothing in federal law that says that. And this judge said that's ridiculous, which really had to make Donald Trump feel nervous. So, I think absolutely he's a flight risk, and I agree with you. He's a snowflake. He's a coward. He wasn't willing to go to Vietnam. He's certainly willing to send other kids to war, and he's certainly willing to sell out allies like the Kurds and slaughter Kurds and Christians, or invite the Turks to do so. There's got to be something in it for him. I don't know what it is. I'm sure we'll find out one of these days.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, did Erdogan give him money like he did Mike Flynn, gave him $500,000, or did he offer a second Trump Tower, or did he threaten to take away the existing Trump Tower in Istanbul? And welcome back. Let's see here. Michael in New York City. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Tom, you're great. Thank you for taking my call. A caller a while back said that she was worried that Trump would start a war.
Right. I think it's a worry that many of us share.
And I think you seconded that possibility.
Yes.
However, I really don't think he's going to try to start a war in his first term. A war might break out accidentally because Trump is completely incompetent.
The point that Bush Jr. made to his biographer in 1999 is that almost without exception, and you can start with Abraham Lincoln, you can look at Woodrow Wilson, you can look at Franklin Roosevelt.
Allow me to interrupt. You know that since you're from Michigan, that Trump won Michigan because people from Michigan had lost an incredible number of young men to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And
I think Trump won Michigan because Michigan was wiped out by NAFTA.
Was one of the reasons. Yes, I agree.
The main reason. I mean, I grew up in Michigan. My family all lives in Michigan. My brothers live in Michigan. I talk with people from Michigan all the time. Some of my old friends. We stay in touch. Trump won Michigan because he said that he had the I don't know if courage is the right word, the good political sense to point out what is widely believed to be an absolute reality by Americans right across the board, but in particular in the industrial Midwest, which is that the NAFTA deal that Reagan and Bush negotiated and Bill Clinton signed screwed working people. And Bill Clinton signing it meant that his wife was like in on it, and Michigan didn't like that, in my opinion.
If Trump waged a war, he would almost automatically lose Michigan. I believe.
I think it depends on the war.
And, well, I don't think people in Michigan really want to see their kids fight in another war. And
Michael, were you an adult around 9/11, 2001?
Sorry?
Were you? I don't know how old you are. I'm wondering if around the time of 9/11 in 2001, if you were an adult.
I was driving across the 59th Street Bridge in New York.
Okay, so you know. Do you remember how within a year the entire country was like, "Oh yeah, let's go to war. Hell, we'll even go to war with a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. Let's do it, guys." I mean, war fever is something that you cannot underestimate, Michael.
Well, I agree, but I really believe that people have had it up the butt with war. And,
wait for another 9/11.
I believe 9/11. There hadn't been much war before that.
My point is, if there was another attack on the United States, a successful attack on the United States, and even a relatively small one like a dirty bomb or something that would just absolutely scare the bejesus out of everybody, then Trump is ready. Any autocrat, I mean, this is how autocrats work. Trump is ready to step into the political space that would create. He's enthusiastic to step into that space. And one wonders if one of the reasons why he's letting terrorists loose and basically promoting terrorist groups is because he's hoping for that kind of an event. God forbid. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, there is a lot going on, isn't there? Bob in Burlington, Vermont. It says here you're a state legislator?
Yeah, you remember a couple of weeks ago I said the downside of taking your advice at the end of the program is you don't get to listen to Thom Hartmann much anymore.
Oh, because you ran for office and won. Good on you, Bob. I do remember. Yeah, thank you.
And I called in one day when you were talking to the federal representative from Minnesota, and I brought up this Convention of States thing because I had not heard anything about it until I actually took my seat. And then I'm just getting barraged every now and then. It's sort of a wave thing with people who are both sides of the aisle. Some want balanced budgets, some want Citizens United. But there's clearly a concerted effort on somebody's part to keep this thing moving.
Yeah, it is one of the arms of the Kochs, that is pushing this thing. And if you Google Convention of States, I think their website is conventionofstates.com or .org. But look it up first. It's something in that neighborhood. And they're bragging about.
Go
ahead.
The guy that sort of got it all started is Christian conservative, homeschool advocate.
Yep.
Just everything that you really don't want to have running your government, but you bring up Barr and some of that other stuff, it brings the point up a little bit more. And I have to say, before we end this, have you ever in your life thought that you would have a conversation that was serious that the last two callers brought forward? A president that would be escaping the land. These times, Jesus.
I never could have imagined it, Bob. I mean, and I'm fully aware of how criminal, how Richard Nixon committed treason to become president, how, according to the president of Iran, Reagan committed treason to become president. George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, the whole Willie Horton thing, used racism to become president. George W. Bush became president because his daddy's friends on the Supreme Court helped him out. Otherwise, he would have lost Florida and Al Gore would be president. And, of course, Donald Trump became president because he was able to manipulate the media and to give him $2 billion worth of free publicity, and he had a foreign country helping him out. And according to Seth Abramson, he had 5 foreign countries helping him out. It's fascinating that the Convention of States, I mean, this is all about getting state legislators engaged, and it's interesting that you're getting that stuff. Bob, I need to move along, but is there anything more you wanted to inform us about?
Just that my plea is that you take it up at some point in time, because I don't think it's something that people are really that aware of.
I have talked about it numerous times, probably once a month or so. I'll go off on a rant about it, and I've published in the last 2 years, I think, 3 articles about it that you can easily find if you search them. Published them on Salon and Alternet and Raw Story and places like that. Bob, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Jeff in Minnesota. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
It's Jack.
Oh, Jack. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. You mentioned Seth Abramson, and I think people should be informed about what he writes about in 2 books, Proof of Collusion and Proof of Corruption. I think the second one is. I read them both.
No, it's Conspiracy is the second one. Proof of Conspiracy. I've got it right here on the desk.
Yeah. Yes. Because we would go to impeachment and then the Senate with a flimsy problem of trying to condemn Trump for doing what appears Biden has done. I realize everybody says he's been cleared of that, but it just gives the Republicans a shouting point.
Well, Biden's son acknowledged on TV yesterday in an interview with ABC News that while he did nothing illegal, it looked bad, and Joe Biden is being rightfully criticized for not having had the good sense to say to his son, listen, I know this is a big deal and it's an opportunity for you and all that kind of stuff, but you just can't trade on my name when I'm sitting in the vice president's office. And he should have said that. Yeah. He should have done that, and he needs to own that. And if he could simply own that, if he could just come out and say, that was an error of judgment, and my family has been to hell and back, and I just was, trying to cut him a little slack, and I shouldn't have done it. If he would just do that, it would be over. And that would be the end of it, and then we could talk about the issues, and his positions on, Medicare for all versus somebody else. That would be a good thing. But yeah. Anyway, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. And we're going to have a fascinating conversation tomorrow after we watch the debate. Tonight it starts at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.